Imagine a world where the truth is so dangerous it has to be whispered in secret. A world where faith, instead of bringing peace, condemns you to the most cruel persecution. I know you've heard many biblical stories, but this is different. Legends, the ancient texts, whisper that there is a forbidden death in the history of the Bible. A story that has terrified generations and that many prefer not to tell. This is the story of a man who was sawn in half because of his visions. And today, the truth about the prophet Isaiah will be revealed. Are you ready to listen? The name of the man was Isaiah, and he was no ordinary prophet. He was a man who, having been so close to God, carried a kind of scar on his spirit. The texts whisper that, in his youth, he was taken into a vision so profound that he witnessed the holiness of God in the temple. He not only saw it, but he felt it. The earth shook, the incense rose, and a seraph flew towards him with a live coal, purifying his lips so that he could speak the word. But what is a blessing for a prophet can become a curse, because from that day on, Isaiah could no longer tolerate lies. He saw the truth so raw, so overwhelming, that he began to live it without compromise, no matter the cost. For decades, Isaiah raised his voice against the corruption of Israel, against the injustice of kings, against the hypocrisy of a people who claimed to serve God but secretly worshipped other gods. He was a kind of conscience of a nation. But every conscience one day grows tired, or, in this case, is silenced. Isaiah's words were a double-edged sword. On one side, they brought the promise of a glorious future, a kingdom of peace, and a Messiah who would be born of a virgin. He prophesied that a branch would sprout from the stump of Jesse, and that one day, the light of hope would illuminate the world. These were the prophecies that gave breath to the people, that made the oppressed dream. But on the other side of the sword, Isaiah's words were in relentless judgment against the present. He prophesied the ruin of Jerusalem, the Babylonian captivity, and the destruction that would come upon the nation because of its sins. It was a painful paradox. The man who carried the most brilliant prophecy of salvation was the same one who saw the darkest of futures, and it was this paradox that put him on a collision course with power. The kingdom of Manasseh lived in a false paradise, and Isaiah's words were the poison that unmasked it. The weight of that mission was unbearable. Isaiah was not a fearless superhuman. He was a man who wept for his nation, who felt the pain of idolatry and the blindness of his people. The Bible speaks of his visions of the future, but not of the psychological burden of being the only one to see the darkness approaching, while everyone else danced in celebration of idols. The loneliness of a prophet is an abyss. He felt like an echo in a desert, a cry that no one wanted to hear, and the weight of his visions pressed on his chest, a silent pain he carried every day. He knew that the ultimate destiny of his faithfulness would not be glory, but sacrifice. King Manasseh was not just a bad man. He was the opposite of what Isaiah represented. Isaiah was purity, Manasseh, corruption. Isaiah was the voice of God, Manasseh, the voice of demons. For Manasseh, Isaiah's existence was a personal affront. The prophet not only condemned him for his actions, but for his very nature, for the evil he had chosen to embrace. Isaiah's voice was a thorn in the king's soul, a constant reminder of the holiness he had rejected. And for Manasseh, the only way to free himself from that discomfort was to eliminate the source of the light, silencing the voice of God forever. The final confrontation was not a battle of swords, but a battle of words. The story tells us that Isaiah was brought before Manasseh in the palace. The king, on his sumptuous throne, surrounded by pagan priests and corrupt advisors, looked at the elderly prophet and asked him cynically, "Where are your prophecies now? Your city has not been destroyed. My gods have given me prosperity." But Isaiah, with the same voice that had once been purified by fire, did not hesitate. He uttered the harshest of his prophecies, condemning the king and his generation to captivity and ruin, and proclaiming that true prosperity was holiness, not gold. Manasseh's fury was instantaneous, a fire of hatred that consumed the last trace of mercy. In that moment, Isaiah sealed his fate. Isaiah's voice, once a beacon of hope, became a threat. With each prophecy of the coming judgment, Manasseh's hatred grew. The prophet became a thorn in the flesh of a king who wanted, above all, to forget God and live in sin. The tension rose to the breaking point. Manasseh needed to silence that voice, not just for politics, but because the sound of Isaiah's prophecies haunted him, reminding him of a holiness he could not have and which he hated with all his might. And then the day came. The story, which is not in the canonical Bible, but is told in Jewish texts and by early church fathers, says that Manasseh, overcome with fury, ordered Isaiah's arrest and execution. The prophet, warned of the danger, fled. Imagine the scene. An old man of almost 90, the same one who had seen the glory of God in the temple, running, breathless, on dusty and rocky paths, with bloodthirsty soldiers on his trail. He hid in a tree trunk, a hollow that seemed his only chance of survival. But there is always a traitor in every story. The persecution was guided not only by the king's rage, but by the betrayal of a group of men. These were men who may have once heard Isaiah's prophecies, but who were now filled with envy, resentment, or were simply bribed. They knew where to look, for they knew the secret routes and places of refuge of the prophets. The act of betrayal was not just the revelation of a location, but the surrender of a life in exchange for coins and political favor. And it was there, in that hollow, with his heart in his throat, that Isaiah was surrounded. The echo of their steps and the glint of their swords among the trees created an atmosphere of pure dread, a spectacle of cruelty that would only end with blood. The prophet had nowhere to go, and the hunt finally came to an end. What happened next is the most shocking part of the story, the part that made the title of this video have to be revealed. They did not kill him with a sword, a clean, quick blow. No, the legend is that, by order of the king, they took a saw, a wooden saw, and killed him in the cruelest and most brutal way possible. Sawn in half, from top to bottom. The method of death is as disturbing as it is symbolic. The saw, a tool of construction, which cuts wood to build, was transformed into an instrument of destruction. The one who preached the unity of God was split in two, a terrible metaphor for what was happening to the nation. The pain, the horror, the slowness of that martyrdom. The story tells us that, even with the saw cutting his flesh, Isaiah did not scream. His body did not tremble. He surrendered, in silence, like a mute lamb. The one who, decades before, had his lips purified by a live coal, now closed them to the world. In his final act of faith and resistance, the act of sawing him was not just a way of killing him, it was a declaration of power, an attempt to reduce the voice of God to a brutal silence. The sight of the soldiers, the heavy silence of the forest, the sound of the blade, everything conspired to create a scene of pure terror. That prophet, who bowed to the holiness of God, now bowed to unimaginable suffering, proving, until his last breath, that the word of God was the only thing he believed in, and that no fear, no terror, could make him deny what he had seen and lived. Isaiah's death did not silence his voice. In fact, it made it eternal. His prophecies about the Messiah, the virgin who would give birth, and the suffering servant who would be crushed for our transgressions, gained a new and terrible meaning. The one who was sawn in half for proclaiming the truth became one of the greatest testimonies of the price of faith. His story echoed for centuries, giving hope to a people in captivity who remembered that suffering is not the end of the story. Isaiah's martyrdom was not a senseless tragedy, but a link in a chain of faithfulness that would culminate in the sacrifice of Christ himself, the Lamb who did not open his mouth. Before his executioners, his life and his death became a shadow of the promise that was to come. The story of Isaiah was hidden, or at least obscured, because it is an uncomfortable reminder. It shows us the price of truth, the real cost of living in holiness in a world of sin, and perhaps, most disturbingly, is knowing that this death, this martyrdom, is mentioned in a sacred text. In the Epistle to the Hebrews, the author speaks of the heroes of faith who were stoned, sawn in two, put to the test, killed by the sword. This reference, so brief but so powerful, is proof that this death, however terrible, was not forgotten by God. Isaiah's martyrdom was not the end. It was the confirmation that faith, for some, costs absolutely everything. And that is a truth that no one can erase. Do you believe that a man could have endured such pain for his faith? That the truth can be so powerful as to generate hatred and violence? If this story touched you, it's because it needed to reach you. Subscribe to the channel, but only if you have the courage to discover other truths that have been hidden over time.